June the 8th, 1995. Shaken, exhausted, and grateful, Air Force Captain Scott O'Grady is delivered to safety on the USS Kearsarge in the Adriatic Sea. He's been running, hunted and hungry in Bosnia for days, desperately calling out for help on his radio. Later, he describes his relief at the first glimpse of his rescuers.
I looked up and there's a United States Marine Corps attack Cobra helicopter flying over. And I tell you, that was a phenomenal sight, knowing that now you're not alone in hostile territory.
The first on scene, clearing the way for a search and rescue team to reach the downed F-16 pilot, is the Marine attack aircraft, the AH-1W Super Cobra. The world's first attack helicopter made its debut in Vietnam 30 years ago. Known as the Snake, the Cobra's unique profile still buzzes across the horizon in war zones around the world. The Cobra's swept profile is meant to be deceiving. Just 90 centimeters across the cockpit, this elusive shape is a real challenge to the enemy.
That's good. Okay. Good. All of you is a bad right under our nose.
We use the aircraft for escort purposes of transport helicopters. We use it for what we refer to as close-in fire support, and that's where troops are engaged very closely with the enemy, and it's very difficult to sort out good from bad. We use it for anti-armor and anti-mech missions. So the aircraft has a tremendous multi-mission capability, and because it's evolved over the years to give us that, I think that's why it's become important to us and why it'll be around for a while.
Is at the Y intersection at Bridge Square 3524.
I've got position. I can see the top of the ridge real good. That's about it. I can move around a little bit back and call you up when there's some good shots.
With the ability to fire more types of weapons than any other helicopter in the world, the Cobra maintains an impressive arsenal with which to strike its enemies. It carries up to 8 tank-destroying missiles, including laser-designated Hellfire or wire-guided tows. Sidewinder missiles, 2.75 rockets, and Zuni rockets can also be fired from the wing pods. And traversing 110 degrees on the Cobra's nose, the powerful 3-barreled 20mm cannon. Two GE T700 turboshaft engines, each rated at 1690 shaft horsepower, press the Cobra into action, making it both a nimble aircraft and a steady weapons platform. At the time Scott O'Grady was shot down, the situation in the former Yugoslavia is grim. In the preceding weeks, UN advisors have been taken hostage. The Serbs have declared war on the UN and NATO. And now an allied US Air Force pilot has been shot out of the sky by a Bosnian missile. Marine mission planners convene on board the USS Kearsarge, just off the coast in the Adriatic Sea. Their job is to assess the threat and put together a package to rescue O'Grady. Cobra pilot Major Scott Mickleby, the escort flight leader of the rescue team, is most concerned about the missiles that took O'Grady down.
Man pads, shoulder-launched SAMs. You know, they're everywhere back in there. Do they have trucks? Do they have vehicles where they can rapidly reinforce or rapidly move to where we are? Their proximity to their ground forces. All these things are things that we had to take into consideration.
Yeah, Roger, Warrior 07. This is EA6V down pilot. I authenticate 1-4.
The team decides on a Delta trap, the tactical recovery of aircraft and personnel for which Marines such as this group at the air station in New River, North Carolina, train extensively. 2 CH-53s carry infantry. 2 Cobras escort them and suppress threats along the highly dangerous route.
The H-1W is perfectly suited for this mission. It had the speed and it had the agility to get in there and deal with the terrain and stay with the 53s and provide good, accurate fires in the objective area if we needed to do that.
Finally, at 3 a.m. on June the 8th, the call goes out for the trap team. There are reports of contact with O'Grady in the area where he was shot down. A few minutes before dawn, the helicopters rumble off the deck of the Kearsarge. Pilots still unsure whether Scott O'Grady is still alive. The Cobra's hefty arms load heightens the confidence of Air Mission Commander and 53 pilot Bill Tarberton.
They're our armed aircraft. I mean, that's their mission in life, is they're our, killers. They protect us, and, we use them all the time. They're going to go ahead of us to make the way clear for the LZ because we take, time on the ground. And, all we have is 250 cal machine guns.
At 16 kilometers from their target location, the Cobras push ahead of the 53s to secure the area.
You ready to push? I'll orbit. Stop. Then I'll be orbiting right.
One concern that we had was that it may be an ambush, it could be a trap. Maybe the Serbs did know where he was, and they were just waiting for the rescue force to come in and they could pull us into some type of an ambush in there.
Suddenly, a voice crackles on the radio. Captain Ian Walsh hears it as he flies the lead Cobra from the back seat.
When we first switched up his frequency and Major Mickleby started calling him, and you instantly heard a kind of a garbled response, to me, individually, that sent a chill down my spine.
So I asked him, I said, hey, when you and your friends got liquored up in high school, what did they call you? And he came right back with terrible 10, so I knew it was him. Because I figured there's no way any Serb would know that.
Once Mickleby confirms it's O'Grady, he directs the Cobras to his location.
I'm approaching the north side of this mountain that's sticking up. And he says, Mark, you're overhead. Well, I went into a hard left turn over the top of him. And Nick Hall, my wingman, he joined me there circling. And we just started orbiting the position.
When you hear it, and then it becomes louder, and then all of a sudden you see the Cobra come over the horizon, there's no mistaking what it is, along with the fact that it's the most beautiful sight in the world.
He said, hey, I had some movement to the south. I heard people walking around and so forth, and these were obviously the people that had been looking for him for the last couple of days.
Roger, I'm in orbit over the Survivor, Buster. Survivor's reporting possible small arms to the south of the objective area. 5 to Buster.
We were in left-hand orbit, about 200 to 300 feet above ground level, and we were what we call 180 out. We were just orbiting, and what that allowed us to do was, in this particular situation, allowed us to have a set of eyes in each cockpit. One set of eyes looking down at the objective area where O'Grady was, and then we still had a guy on either side of the circle that was able to scan outward and watch for any threat that was coming in.
But come easy left, just around that hill at your left, 10 o'clock. Get the Survivor just down on the other side of the slope.
Major Mickleby makes the critical decision to bring in the troop helicopters.
Button, he's off to your right.
Pretty much, we'd flipped all of our cards up on the table. That any Serbs in the area would know, hey, something's going on because we've got aircraft circling over here, something's happening.
The lead 53, piloted by Bill Tarberton, makes an impressive landing.
Because all of a sudden, he just stood the 53 on its tail. And I mean, I've never seen a 53 do this before, but he stood the thing on its tail and went right down into the fog on top of the smoke.
Scott Mickleby made probably the best decision of the whole day. They asked me if I saw them land. I did. I saw them land to the south. He said, we'll move towards them, gave me permission to advance, and I started running as fast as I could.
Move towards them.
It was actually kind of funny because while he's running, I'm telling him, keep moving, keep going, get to him. He's taking time to come up on the radio and say, you know, I'm going as fast as I can. I can hear him breathing hard and everything.
Bud, he's on the way. He's at your right 3 o'clock. Bud, you got a tally on him?
Yeah, negative, we're looking 26.
With the 53s on the ground, there's some confusion. The Marines look for O'Grady to come out from their right. Many run into the woods to look for him.
I was in the crew chief's window, manning a 50 cal, and as we were setting down, as soon as we got on the deck, I just happened to look out the aircraft, and I seen him running around towards the nose of our aircraft.
He came out at 10 o'clock over from that direction over there. Everybody was looking to the right, and what he had done was worked his way around through the woods.
So at that time, I said, hey, I'm going to go out and get him. So I opened up the crew door and ran out there to get him.
I had my 9mm pistol out, and he took that away from me because of the fact that he didn't want that being discharged by accident.
I guess being out there for 6 days, he didn't want to give the weapon up. So I just used a wrist tap to get the pistol from him.
Fister's a big guy, and I wasn't going to argue with him.
Well, he's a real small guy, so, and the 50 cal was hanging out over the edge of my door, and the terrain was uneven again, so he was having a hard time figuring out how to get up inside there. So I just kind of grabbed him by the backside and shoved him, threw him up, whatever you want to call it, threw him up inside the aircraft.
Magic, Linus, have the person.
Many of the infantry are still in the woods as O'Grady boards the troop helicopter. The urgency is evident in Mickleby's voice as he tries to move the mission along.
Bud, Mick, you guys got him? Okay, let's get this show on the road. Come in here too long.
Magic, copy.
The weather's starting to clear, and there's a lot of buildings around here.
I know this, Mick. I got to get the people on board.
You got to remember, their mission is to protect us, and they were above us hovering, and they were beginning to see, the fog was beginning to clear as we were in the LZ. It was beginning to slide away a little bit. He was beginning to see some people, and, they're spring-loaded to protecting us.
The Marines reboard their choppers and pull out. To this point, it's been a successful mission.
I said, now this is going to be the toughest part of the mission now because we got this guy. And the tendency is to say, okay, yeah, we got him here, we're just going back out to the ship now.
Ahead of them lies a deadly web of SAM sites, primed and ready for their return trip. Far above the returning helicopters, an AWACS warning flashes to the Cobra pilots. The dreaded SAM sites have been spotted.
From the side of the aircraft, I see this grayish-white corkscrew smoke trail. My first instinct was, you gotta be kidding me. They're not starting that. Here we are, we're 25 miles from getting feet wet and getting this guy home, and now all of a sudden they're gonna shoot SAMs at us.
I just had a SAM shot at me from 3 o'clock.
It was just incredibly fast. In training, we always talk about, okay, this is what we're gonna do if they engage us with a missile. You don't have time to do it.
Sergeant Pfister fires a few rounds of his 50 caliber machine gun. The decision is made not to fight, but head for ship with their precious cargo. The Serbs manage one last shot at O'Grady before he is returned to safety.
One of the bullets went through the helicopter that I was in, actually hit into Sergeant Castro's canteen and rattled around on the floor, and the Marine that was sitting next to him just kind of picked it up, looked at it, picked it up, and put it in his pocket.
It went through there, it went down the ramp, it hit a radio up top.
With Cobras leading the way, the mission through high-threat terrain draws to a bloodless end.
For this specific mission, it was the aircraft of choice. Highly maneuverable, a lot of power, a lot of speed, can stay up with the 53s. It was a superb mission for the Cobra, and it really showed the value of the aircraft.
When American troops land in Vietnam, they find a guerrilla war, a jungle war with no discernible front. Ground commanders need fast and furious ordnance to back up their men wherever they engage their elusive enemy. Huey helicopters are rigged with makeshift weapons, but heavy guns and ammunition make them too slow to keep up with troop and cargo aircraft. Air Force bombing is powerful, but imprecise and sometimes dangerous to friendly troops fighting head-to-head with the enemy. Bell Helicopter sees the need in Vietnam and in less than a year, with no military contract, designs and manufactures the world's first attack helicopter. By September 1967, the maiden shipment of AH-1 Cobras is on its way to Vietnam, with key elements like the power plant, transmission and rotors lifted directly from the dependable Huey. Armament and weaponry is carried in the chin turret and on the pylons under two wings. First impressions are stunning.
The aircraft was a tandem seat arrangement like a fighter, and all the ordnance that could be used on it, and the fact that you could actually protect yourself with it. And it was a glamorous aircraft at the time. It still is.
Immediately, the Cobras fly into action on escort, fire support and reconnaissance missions. Many pilots are part of the Air Cavalry, units with roots in the Wild West. These are self-contained strike forces, tailored specifically for aggressive, offensive tactical operations. The pilots take on the esprit de corps of the Horse Cavalry, made famous in the epic Apocalypse Now.
It was a devil may care attitude, live for today, carpe diem.
John Barron is a 22-year-old Cobra pilot based 50 kilometers south of the demilitarized zone. These scenes of his 2nd of the 17th Cavalry Unit were shot with his camera.
We were out there pushing the envelope. We were out there kicking the devil in the teeth and waiting to see what had happened. A lot of people died. So, you know, you didn't know if you were going to be dead tomorrow or what. So basically, 21 years old out there, fighting hard, playing hard.
Chief Warrant Officer Barron flies reconnaissance in what are widely known as hunter-killer teams. Usually a combination of a Loach observer helicopter and a Cobra. The two aircraft fly together from dawn till dusk, trying to pick a fight with an enemy that doesn't want to be found.
It was a guerrilla-type order. Stay concealed, get the ammunition or the rockets or whatever they were hauling to their destination. And our job was to find their supplies and destroy their supplies.
21-year-old graduate Bob Sidonio flies the Loach, the little bird. His job is to get down as close to the ground as possible, hot on the trail of the Viet Cong.
We would follow footprints through little holes in the trees. We would find debris from wrappers, from cigarette packages, wrappers from food. They would step in water and they'd actually leave muddy footprints swirling in the water if they had just recently passed, because the water didn't move very fast in a lot of places, and it would be muddy. You could see that. We'd actually start picking up mosquitoes striking the aircraft, leaving splotches of blood from feeding on the humans down there. And that would give us a good idea of how close we were.
Barron's Cobra hovers high, waiting for Sidonio's Loach to stir up trouble.
22 and 2717 is going to be popping up and taking a look, and if you'll stay down, I'll call you up.
All right, sir.
I referred to the scout as a punk kid brother. He'd walk up and kick the devil in the shins, and then I had to come in and actually, fight the devil.
We would be trying to approach from downwind, and we would also be trying to approach from downhill as much as possible to minimize our noise signature and keep the gun in a position where we could bring our own gun to bear if necessary. The Cobra would be flying at an altitude approximately 1,500 to 3,000 feet off the ground to allow them to maintain a position where they'd be able to dive at any time to protect us.
All
World 30, Line 17 here. Hold your position south. Say again, hold your position south. Action coming your way. Roger, Line 17.
The scout pilot spot reports a lot of times was like a Geiger counter in the sense that they would talk normal tone of voice. We got a road down here, and it looks like it has traffic in the last 2 or 3 days. And they got some spider holes next to it, and it looks like spider holes. Taking fire!
No, the top be out of ammo. We got him in sight. There he goes, at 9 o'clock. Sun River. Kill him.
Once the hunter provokes a fight, the killer swoops in. For pilots so young, they showed an incredible desensitivity to their actions.
So I tried to put ammunition on them, and also ammunition as close to the little bird as possible so that people that were under him hadn't had a chance to start shooting him and knock him out of the air. He was very vulnerable during those first few seconds of the engagement because he had to transition to speed to get out of there. And at that time, his nose is pointed at the ground. If his engine gets shot out, that's where he's going. It's right straight down.
It needs to be nearly instantaneous. The gun cover that we had in my troop was excellent. They could tell simply by the way the aircraft maneuvered that there was trouble coming, and they were already inbound with the sights on a target area. We would catch somebody unawares. We'd catch a unit while it was en route from one location to another location, and we would pin them down until we could get some more suppressive fires out there to destroy them. A majority of our contacts were very violent, very short skirmishes.
Sidonio engages the enemy day after day and soon proves how vulnerable the poorly armed Loach really is.
I was shot down a total of 8 times flying scouts. In one particular battle, I left 3 aircraft at the same road intersection in 2 days.
1970, an invasion of Cambodia amid a U.S. promise to pull out of Vietnam results in a scorching backlash in the States. Those who thought the war was over now realize it will drag on. Protests, then riots break out around the country with disastrous results. Throughout the next year, President Nixon continues the process of Vietnamization, handing the war over to President Cho and his South Vietnamese forces so Americans can finally go home. Cobra pilot John Barron left Vietnam to be married, but is called back for an offensive meant to thwart a mounting threat of a North Vietnamese invasion and prove the South Vietnamese army can stand on its own. US advisors and ground troops are held back from the action. The only Americans ordered into Laos are pilots, including John Barron and Bob Sidonio.
We were hearing from the local hire personnel that we were going to be moving and that they wanted to know if they were going to continue to keep their jobs or were they going to get paid while we were gone. So we had a good idea that possibly the mission had been compromised before we ever left.
The troops are to leapfrog by helicopter and convoy along an east-west supply line into Laos and seize the town of Che Pon. Neither the pilots nor the South Vietnamese troops are prepared for what awaits them in this February offensive known as Lam Son 719.
The thinking in Saigon was, let the South Vietnamese cross into Laos and destroy North Vietnamese emplacements, take a major supply area in this town of Chapon, prove they had what it takes to fight a real battle. But ironically, of course, the US had never gone into Laos in the past. It was always regarded as a very dangerous venture.
After a promising start by the South Vietnamese, the NVA mounts a brutal counterattack. The North controls this territory. They're not about to give it up. These are North Vietnamese regulars, not poorly armed Viet Cong of the South. This is no longer a guerrilla war. These are conventional weapons, yet the Americans still find it impossible to gain parity. The pilots are up against a highly motivated enemy. For John Barron, it becomes a very different war.
At that time, they were still operating at altitude. They thought 1,500 feet was a safe altitude for small arms, 7.62. And we were being shot at by 23, 37, 57, some cases SAM missiles. I had a SAM pass by me one time while I was flying.
The deadly anti-aircraft environment is a nightmare for American pilots. Helicopters are picked out of the sky by deadly North Vietnamese weaponry. The poorly armed scouts flown by Bob Sidonio are grounded. 90% of Cobras sent into Laos suffer significant damage. The losses are devastating.
There was 9 aircraft commanders in my troop, and I was one of 2 that was still there. Either they'd been killed or wounded during the initial onslaught.
In a desperate move to stay alive, Cobra pilots swoop down to fly at and below the tree line in Laos, dodging fire, confusing the enemy.
The vegetation itself was working for us in the sense that the guys on the ground could only see you for a short period of time if you were lower. They couldn't get a chance to track you, and even if they did get a chance to track you, they didn't have much time to shoot at you.
This is a momentous change in tactics to what is called nap of the earth flying, which the Cobra and other helicopters have used effectively ever since. The Cobras improve their survival rate, but the Lam Son operation falls completely apart.
I didn't think that the South Vietnamese Army had the drive that the North Vietnamese Army had. I don't know if it was training or morale or what. It just seemed like they weren't pushing as hard to drive the North Vietnamese back.
After weeks of scathing and unanticipating North Vietnamese assaults and a mounting battle toll, nearly 2,000 dead, 5,000 wounded, and with 107 helicopters destroyed, the military decide to pull out before the nightmare gets worse.
It was pandemonium. It wasn't a controlled extraction like a lot of extractions. It was, you know, if we can get out of here, let's get out of here.
In the end, when the withdrawal was ordered, many of the soldiers, fled through the jungle. Others just grabbed helicopter skids and came out hanging onto the skids of helicopters in pictures that were very demoralizing to the Vietnamese per se and to the rest of the world. I mean, it looked like a complete rout, which in fact it was. It was a mistaken operation.
By 1972, the question of whether the Cobra can provide close air support on a full-fledged conventional battlefield remains unanswered. The proving ground comes on March the 30th, 1972, Easter Eve. North Vietnamese General Nguyen Giap takes advantage of a stepped-up US withdrawal and sends 200,000 troops smashing into South Vietnam in 3 critical locations. The goal? To divide the country and snatch it from President Thieu.
The Russians told them, don't mess around with this little guerrilla warfare anymore. You can't win it that way. Go blitzkrieg, and we'll give you the tanks and so forth. So most of our troops...
Colonel Bill Miller is the senior American advisor in An Loc, a provincial southern capital strategically located on Highway 13, within striking distance of Saigon.
Come into An Loc, hit us from 3 sides, moved in with tanks and infantry and artillery like, my God, you ain't never seen it like it before. It was like popcorn popping. I mean, it wasn't no damn guerrilla war about that. I mean, that was for real.
It was a dagger aimed at the heart of Saigon, and it would have made future negotiations on the course of the war very difficult for the United States.
As the North Vietnamese advance towards An Loc, an aerial field artillery unit called the Blue Max, based just north of Saigon, goes on high alert. Former Green Beret Major Larry Mackay is the commander of the Cobra unit, call signed Serpent 6.
There were 9 battalions. That's a big unit. 1 battalion is a big unit. 9 battalions of anti-aircraft that the North Vietnamese brought down. It went from a low intensity to high intensity and just passed right through a mid-intensity.
With 15,000 civilians to worry about in An Loc, Bill Miller set up a headquarters with other advisors to try to get a handle on the battle. Suddenly, 6 NVA T-54 tanks reached the town's main street and rumbled towards Miller's bunker.
So it gave way, and we lost about half of what we had. And 2 or 3 of the tanks got through the line. Somebody come up on my push and said, this says Serpent 6. Yeah, and I said, what you got? He said, I got a flight of Cobras. I said, ooh, there's too much anti-aircraft here. I think if you ever roll in, you might not roll out. He said, negative, negative, sir. I got HEAT, and that's high explosive in a tank. And I said, you beautiful dog.
Mackay's Cobra unit has a brand new shipment of advanced anti-tank rockets, rarely used in Vietnam to this point. Miller knows the Cobra and HEAT rockets are a lethal combination for the North Vietnamese. This would be a critical test for the as yet unproven Cobra. Swooping down and with the element of surprise in their favor, the Cobras attack the unsuspecting tanks below.
We rolled in at a very steep angle for us because we did not want the rockets to get off target, and so we were concerned primarily about Americans on the ground, Vietnamese on the ground, and Vietnamese civilians on the ground.
They deal with that big mother up front first. And the most beautiful sight could ever be seen in any man's eyeballs is when there's an iron horse out there. See a Cobra lower his nose ever so slight, just like he's flying down a clothesline like that, and psst, shoots those rockets.
The tank back immediately exploded. He was near the gas area, and I think that assisted us in what had happened, and we clearly knew that the lead tank was immobilized.
The Cobras take out 3 tanks in all, stunting the North Vietnamese force inside the city.
Beside me, the South Vietnamese, might have been a colonel, I think he was the intelligence officer, that had some radios on a North Vietnamese net. And he said the tankers in the airlock was calling back to the command, enemy tankers now, calling back, said, hey, you said they wouldn't come in on us if they got inside town, said the Americans wouldn't bring it in on their own troops, so what do we do?
That's not the end of the fighting. A bitter 90-day siege follows. Associated Press reporter Peter Arnett drove into the city to see the destruction.
All the buildings were destroyed. There was carnage in the streets. There were many casualties amongst the civilians and the soldiers. It was a mess, that city. But at least it had held.
The deadly follow-up of B-52 strikes and other U.S. air power pummels the North Vietnamese, finally throwing back the force in mid-July. Mackay's Cobra unit destroys 20 T-54 tanks in all, but not without losses. 8 out of 32 Blue Max pilots are killed. An Loc has proved itself a place on the modern battlefield for the attack helicopter, but the Cobra will need precision-guided standoff weapons to remain effective. Colonel Miller believes An Loc would not have held at all had it not been for the actions of the Cobras on that first day.
He had An Loc, but the bastard didn't know he had it. And I'm here to tell you, those Cobras was the instrument that caused it to kind of the pendulum to swing back and let us be defensive.
3 years later, free of the threat of lethal American air power, the North Vietnamese roll into Saigon and seize the South Vietnamese capital.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hack. Time was 10:15. Okay, everybody's here. Just had your time hack. Aircraft.
This briefing of Cobra and CH-53 pilots at Marine Corps Air Station New River in Jacksonville, North Carolina, is a familiar scene. The Marines fly the updated AH-1 Whiskey Cobra as their main battlefield attack helicopter.
And the only other change I have is on the very front part, and this is for the skid guys. Our ordnance load, 4 tows, I-tows, 4 Hellfire, 7 2.75 HE, 7 2.75 Flechette, 600 round 320.
And as the battlefields of the world invariably evolve, so does the Cobra gunship. The Marines added a second engine in Vietnam, giving the aircraft greater power and range so it could fly off ships and carry more weaponry. The power plant is improved. The fuel system is designed to survive direct 50 caliber hits. The Marine version is the only attack helicopter protected against harsh environments like salt water and desert sand. The latest improvement to the Cobra, the Night Targeting System, or NTS, gives the Cobra a night point target capability to support the troops. Desert Storm veteran Colonel Ken Kanatsa says the limitations of the Cobra without the night targeting system became most obvious during the Gulf War.
We just had the basic whiskey, so at night we were strictly relying on our goggles and artificial illumination, flares, and such to be able to see our targets. Many times at night we let targets go because we couldn't identify specifically that they were not American. So if we couldn't tell, we wouldn't shoot.
That's not to say that during the Gulf War, the Cobra isn't busy and effective. Despite its lack of sophistication, the Cobra proves itself a dependable weapon.
Roger, engage it, Will.
Wings level. Good gauges. Cleared hot. Dead hot. Right on.
We generally kept the Cobras close to the lead forces, and then when we needed them, we'd get them airborne and we'd run them in a racetrack pattern so that we would be behind the attacking forces but close enough to the lines that we could pick up the target designations and fire our missiles And we kept that continuous throughout the attack on the first day, second day, and the third day of the war.
We're still G-Day.
General Mike Myatt commands one of 2 U.S. Marine divisions set to push through Iraqi minefields and on to Kuwait City.
Plan is that about 0600, Ripper starts the explosive breach.
We made more ground that first day than we had really felt possible. We'd actually gone through 2 obstacle belts. These are the same 2 obstacle belts that the Iraqis had put in and prepared and put mines and ditches for months.
Myatt sets up his command post on the edge of a fire-raging oil field, ignited by retreating Iraqis on the eastern side of Kuwait. The area looks unnavigable. Hours later, Myatt receives an urgent radio call from a task force commander.
And he'd found in there some counterattack plans that the Iraqis had planned for the 5th Mechanized Division to attack right at my CP. So he called me and he said, General Myatt, I think, you know, I know you're counting on this secure flank up there, but he said, you know, you may need some help. So then we put together this TOT, all of the artillery pieces, to fire on one grid, and then shifted to fire on another grid.
It's like stirring up a hornet's nest. Out from the oil field roars tank after Iraqi tank, pushing within yards of Myatt's command. They call it danger close. Myatt calls in the Cobras with their tow and Hellfire missiles to destroy the tanks. The Cobras work closely with the Marines on the ground for the next several hours.
They were so close to us that the 20-millimeter casings from the Cobra helicopters firing at the Iraqis were actually landing in my tent. If it wasn't so scary, it was just absolutely a beautiful sight.
After expending enormous amounts of energy, ammunition, and fuel, Iraqi units surrender en masse to the Marine Division. The most telling challenge for the Cobras comes on day 3 of the ground war, when the weather turns sour, with mist and rain conspiring with smoke from the oil fires as the Marines try to push forward to Kuwait City. Squadron Commander Mike Kurth.
I can only describe it as like something out of Dante's Inferno. You get some appreciation for exactly what that was like. It was absolutely bizarre.
General Myatt's division advances north towards Kuwait International Airport when his forces come upon the Iraqis. The troops need backup, but the Cobra's night vision goggles are unable to guide them through 20 kilometers of burning oil fields and dismal weather. Help comes when Colonel Kurth volunteers to lead the Cobras in a Huey helicopter, fitted out with a forward-looking infrared system.
I'd take about 4 attack helicopters, I'd line them up behind me, turn my lights on, and I'd have them follow me through the smoke until we got to a clear area.
He was able to find that, come back through this smoke. I mean, it was like midnight out there. He was a pathfinder up through the enemy lines, up towards the front lines. He just did it all day long, back and forth. A couple of times, you know, rounds being fired all the time. He's going right through the battle to get our forces right to where they needed to be.
For nearly 12 hours, Kurth leads Cobras up to the front, where they blast away at tanks and help the Marines secure the airport the next morning. the Allied forces move on to recapture Kuwait City from the retreating Iraqis, and Colonel Kurth moves on to receive the Navy Cross for valor.
It made all the difference in the world. Without Colonel Kurth's efforts out there, we would have won the battle. I don't think we would have lost, but we would have had a lot more casualties than what we did. He made the difference in getting forces to the front line to support the grunts.
The action also makes it clear that Cobras desperately need the FLIR and night targeting system. The Cobra has changed its skin so often, it's turning into a different kind of snake. That may be why rumor has it the next incarnation of this attack aircraft, with a four-bladed bearingless rotor, may be called the Viper. The Viper will have a computerized cockpit, digital communications, 6 extra weapon stations, a moving map display, and will fly 25% faster than its present top speed of 190 knots. After decades of battle, this lethal flying machine is turning faster, meaner, and more deadly.